Was there something that involved a long and enjoyable chase to get a coin? And that being one of your
Well,
favorite
the
coins?
chase was waiting until maybe the piece you wanted was sold. That still goes on today. There's a piece coming up in a few months that I've looked for over 20 years. Any grade is extremely rare. I think maybe what happened then is most of the really spectacular pieces were purchased from one person. And I knew him, and I could not afford to buy them when he bought them, but he knew me. And when he got ready to sell the collection, I bought the collection.
Right.
And that had about a dozen pieces in it, all of which I knew exactly what they were, where they came from, and had wanted to buy those for years. And if you talk about one particular piece, I guess that would be the Lord St. Oswald dollar.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
And it came up at a fun show, and I didn't know that it was for sale. And John Dedworth and I were there together, and I said, see how much they want for it. And what was funny is the dealer who had it, he says, I have two coins for the same price. They're $125,000. And he put the two pieces down.
Are you serious?
And he says, you can decide which one you'd rather have. So one was the ultra high relief of St. Gordon's.
Yeah.
And the other was the St. Oswald dollar. Wow. And I looked at them both and I said, that piece is absolutely beautiful and it's just spectacular. But there's a dozen of them that are probably, they all look alike. They're all that nice.
They're all brand new.
That piece has a great history, is spectacular, and I've never seen anything close to it.
Sure.
So it was an easy choice to take the dollar. But it's funny, they were both the same price. When the dollar sells, I'll give you a prediction, I think it'll $6.5 million.
$6.5 million all in. I think right now it's like up to pushing 5 almost.
Is it? That's my guess.
Got a week to go.
And look, that's my guess. I think, what would you have, about 3.5 for the ultra high relief lately, or
yeah, maybe closer to 4.
Okay, so now you're looking at,
now the quality is getting involved. Before they were all the same, and now it's like a 68 to a 69 or 67 could be a few million bucks.
So, but they were a tie.
Sure.
So when you look, you now see the disparity in those pieces.
That's an excellent point. So let's say it's I don't want to use the word average quality, but let's say the assumption is it's a proof 68 ultra high relief. It's pushing 4 million. But this $1,794 was so unique for what it is. There's not 10 of them that look like that.
Right.
There's just
and even for the one made with it, because the two pieces were in that sale, the St. Oswald's second one, which sold not long ago at Stack's.
Sure.
It is just simply not as nice as the first. There's a noticeable difference.
Sure.
And yet they were purchased on the same day from the U.S. Mint, and it's a strike quality issue, not whether or not it's truly uncirculated. They're both treated the same.
It looks like an 1880s Morgan dollar. It's flashy. It's cartwheel. It's stunning the way the coin looks. It's very original. But it's fascinating, the provenance history. Lord St. Oswald. I mean, it's a gentleman who came over from England in 1794. And I think he bought, about $5 in face value of coinage?
Well, actually, the story about it, which is one I didn't know, that's also one of those stories that all the dealers told that wasn't accurate. You'll have to forgive me, I'm trying to remember who recently wrote about them. But they're talking about the representative who came, how they were purchased, and the whole complete story is far more fascinating than the simple version, including the fact that in St. Oswald's residence, the in-house carpenter was Chippendale.
Oh, wow.
And the cabinet that these coins are in is a specially made Chippendale coin cabinet. Really cool. So I would encourage. Is
that out there still?
Yes, I would encourage you. The internet finds everything. Okay, I'll read the full story, because the reason is I don't want to misspeak. But it's not the simple Lord St. Oswald visit buying these things. He ends up with them. He's got them. But there's way more to the story than that. The story that is exact, though, and hasn't changed, is those pieces are all together. They were acquired at the same time, and you ended up with a group of $half that were spectacular, all different varieties. Even the small head that's in there is amazing. And you end up with some copper pieces that are just spectacular.
Some cents, maybe a chain cent.
I don't remember. I think it seems to me I remember the 1794, 95 cents. I don't remember a cent being earlier than that. I also, somewhere in the back of my mind, think that the auction house had some additional pieces that weren't in the same St. Oswald offering. So that I'm not certain of. But the pieces and their acquisition is correct. The whole story is more interesting, entertaining, but the bottom line is the same.
That's good. So you've had a good time collecting coins, without a doubt. I mean, you're having a blast. So after your typeset and you've got an amazing collection of medals, what else have you been collecting? Like, people's tastes change. I think what collectors need to understand.
Well, what happened was I came to Congress during the Centennial Congress. And when you have a background of loving history and loving this, I was not collecting anything at the time, but down the road from where I had rented a house, there was a shop, Joe Levine, who became a good friend of mine, and it was more like an Americana place. And he had been a coin dealer in earlier years, but he had medals. And what fascinated me, especially coming with the 100 Congress, was how inexpensive some of the really nice medals were. They went all the way back to the beginnings of the government. And since I was there and not far from an inaugural coming up, I was fascinated by the inaugural medals and their history. And there was no book. Now I say there was no book, so I'll offend 4 people by saying that. But what I mean was, you had a couple of short books where they just showed a picture of the inaugural medal, described it, and said this is that year. So yes, that existed. But there was no story.
Dialogue or story.
There was no understanding of how they got made, who made it,
Sure.
how the designer got into play. So my wife's public relations firm, I'll just use an anecdote rather than have you hear 100 of them, but all of them would go the same way. One of the things I would do when she was doing events was they lived right down the street, I'd pick up Linda Robb and take her over to the event. I loved her.
Is that with Raw Antiques?
No.
Okay,
That's Lyndon Johnson's daughter.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Married to Chuck Robb.
Okay.
So she had an extraordinary knowledge still does, of American history, and she could easily name every president. That wasn't the game. She could name everyone who ran.
Really? Wow.
In every year. And so she starts talking about this, and then she told me a story about Lyndon and the inaugural medal, and that he would drive every day when he was a senator, and he'd turn right and make the turn, he'd cross the bridge, and there was the Iwo Jima monument, made by Felix de Weldon, one of the great bronze artists in history with work all over the world. So he wanted, when he ended up elected, he wanted de Weldon to make the medal.
Makes sense.
Well, de Weldon had never made a medal. He made gigantic structures. So Lyndon got a gentleman named, his last name is Miller, who had been with him all of his career in Texas and everywhere. Go talk to him, talk him into it. So he goes over there and somehow ends up talking de Weldon into making the medal. So de Weldon is so concerned about it that he makes a plaster about this big and about this thick. And he has it delivered to the White House to make sure that the president is happy with the portrait, because he does not want to do this if it doesn't get 100% approval. Lyndon loved it. He thought it was absolutely wonderful. In fact, I think he would probably like it made that big. But they end up using the design. Well, the plaster that was done was retained at the White House. Lyndon Johnson later sent it to Stuart Symington, because Kennedy's initial choice for vice president was Symington. But when they got to the convention and the maneuvers of a very powerful chairman, Speaker of the House, Sam Rayburn, it ended up Lyndon. So after he was inaugurated at the plaster, he sent it to Stuart Symington with a note saying, this could have been a portrait of you, signed Lyndon. Yeah. Well, Stuart Symington gave it to his son, James. Jim Symington was a friend of mine. He gave it to me. And what I've just told you repeated 100 times for different medals. The chairman of the inaugural ball in '61 in Kennedy was Lindy Boggs. Lindy Boggs was one of my dearest friends.
He's a big lawyer,
and a co-member of the Louisiana delegation and part of American history, and the first woman to preside over a congressional joint session. But anyway, so she gave me some pieces that she had gotten from Kennedy, including some that are unique as chairman of the inaugural ball. Different people gave me different things. And then some of them had retained the artwork. And I actually, by the time that we ended up with the 1989 inaugural, 2 years later, I was already collecting these and having an idea of putting the history together with them. Yeah. So I ended up with some great pieces out of out of Bush won. And then I ended up chairman of the Metals Committee.
Oh, that's great.
For the next two, for 93 and 97, and then on the committee for 01 and 05. And then having both the insight and the knowledge of the background, and it's like being given a key to the mint. I made stuff.
You did?
And I made stuff that I thought...
Was this at midnight or was this during...
Oh, no.
This is during business hours.
Made stuff. And we got the two mints that had been engaged to do it. And so what I did for Clinton, I got a great big metal made. It's the biggest inaugural medal ever made, but it's the exact diameter of the Great Jefferson medal. So I did that. Then there's a gold charm that there's only about 20 of that was done as a VIP present. Sure. But I made the charm the same diameter as the Andrew Jackson gold medal that was made. So I was actually using parts of history in order to, then historically I used the 63 millimeter size for the silver, and then I did the gold medal. But what's funny is I had known Mac McClarty, the chief of staff for Clinton. I'd actually never met Governor Clinton. And I actually met him after he was elected in the course of being in Congress, but I'd never met him beforehand. But we get to, we did a medal ceremony, and we get to the medal ceremony, and I'm handing him the gold medal, and he says, he knew everything. He said, you collect these things, don't you? He says, well, you can have it. You want the medal? I said, no. I said, put the medal in the presidential library. I said, but look, there's 3 of these. I said, I actually have a gold medal as chairman of the Metals Committee. This one's yours, and the 3rd one is now over at the Smithsonian. He says, well, okay. So he has his little set there. There's just the regular set sold to the public, but it's edge engraved William Jefferson Clinton. He said, well, did they make lots of these? I said, but yours is special. He says, well, I'll give you this one. And he opens the box and autographs it. I still have it.
That's so cool. Hey.
So and then...
Got to get it graded. That's really cool.
But I ended up with so many people. The artwork I have is more impressive than the medals, because most of the medals were made in quantity and whatever they say. But the artwork and the history behind them. And so what I wrote was, for each of the presidents, and I'm going to publish the book, not because of anything other than having information, but it's a political story of the election, then an inaugural story, and then the medals reflect the artwork of the time. But I've tied the 3 together, and there's probably nobody writing who would have both the political background to understand who got appointed to the inaugural committee and why, and then what they made and how they got it, like Lyndon Picking, Felix de Weldon. There's a story like that. Mrs. Kennedy picked Manship, and he was in his 80s, and he couldn't do the medal. He had retired. She phones him, and she says, I would like you to do this. I know you made the Roosevelt medal in 33, and I love it. I'd like you to make this medal. He says, Mrs. Kennedy, she says, let me tell you about your artwork. When she was at Vassar, she had written a thesis on him, on Manship. She knew everything he had made anywhere in the world. And he says later in an article, he says, I couldn't tell her no. She knew every single thing about everything I had ever
She did her homework. She knew it.
Every single thing. Right. So that kind of story is what I'm talking about. Sure, it relates. It's not just a happenstance, and sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just totally whatever happened. Sure. Other times, you have people like Theodore Roosevelt, who went to enormous lengths to control the medal because he wanted exactly what he wanted, and who had known St. Gaudens, and this is the part that most people, because they were in the same club in New York, and the same person got them together and introduced them to each other.
It's interesting. I didn't realize that.
That's right. And the idea was to groom St. Gaudens, even then in 1889 when they met.
Oh, they met in 1889.
That's right.
I didn't realize it. Oh, wow.
To later redesign coinage.
Yeah.
And people who think it happened just because of his designing the inaugural medal, this had been a plan all along.
No wonder they're so successful. Making a high relief and because they've known you, they worked together.
All along.
So how many presidents have you known?
7.
7. Did the numismatics ever come up?
Well, I was having fun with, I loved President Bush, and actually President Bush had been in business with my wife's grandfather.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I just was fortunate enough, I had the run of the White House for 2 different White Houses. For Bush one, because I knew everybody over there, and for Clinton, not because I knew the governor and president beforehand, but I knew everybody over there, Matt McClarty and the others. So for that period of time, it was far different than being a member of Congress. And because of what Leslie was doing, she didn't do political events, but she did all of these events. They were nonprofit events, and she did all of the fundraising events for causes, which a whole lot of the political people did. So I met because of her. I met as many people as I met because of Congress, and because of it, she did a lot of White House-related events where the president, whomever it was, would attend. So it was just absolutely wonderful. But in talking about coins, I brought President Bush a misstruck of one of his own inaugural medals.
Oh, that was fascinating.
And it was all screwed up. Sure. And I said, you ought to keep this on your desk because it's probably how you feel sometimes. And he busted out laughing. And he says, I want to give you something back. And he reaches and he gets his tie clip. And he takes off the presidential tie clip and he hands it to me. And the photographer took a picture one after another. So I have a picture of me talking to him with his tie clip and with it gone.
Oh, that's neat. Yeah, that's good memory. Yeah, it's good memory. Sure.
But he was fascinated with the medal. His wife, whom I've talked to her maybe 2 times, but I can see why so many people loved her. She was such a charming lady. She affected that medal. She didn't like his signature on the 1989 medal, and it was too late to get it off. Later, jump forward to 2001, they're making the Bush II medal. Sure. It has his signature on it. It's not made yet. She gets it off. And I have one with the signature on it that was made before it was removed, and a copy of her letter.
So it's type 1 variety.
Of the letter that she originally wrote saying that she objected and really didn't want the signature on there. Wow. And when you put them together, you see her fingerprints clearly on removing it the second time.
That's cool. That's very cool. Yeah. That's good stories right there. Very good stories.
Well, when you put them together, they're political stories, they're personal stories. Yeah. And Lyndon Johnson's nose. I mean, it's just he hated that they made an inaugural ball medal. The nose was way too big, and Lindy Boggs got it redesigned to make the nose smaller.
That's funny.
And then that's what they used on the medal that he had created as a double profile medal in 1961.
Interesting. That's fascinating.
It's the personalities and the events, and like I say, the artwork, and it reflects the time.
Sure.
When you look at that artwork, even if you didn't know the year, you could guess it because you can almost see the and also the climate of the times, what was going on.
So how do you feel about the future of the hobby right now? Young collectors,
well,
technology,
I have both some optimistic and some pessimistic views. I'll talk to people who are doing A&A seminars and things, and they say the young people that come out there are fascinated, very interested, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. That makes you, very optimistic. On the other hand, we're going to a coinless society. We're not going to have kids ever picking up change or caring about what's on it in the not too distant future. We have great access, but the access is not to objects, it's to image. Like libraries are becoming so virtual, and paintings, great paintings. Well, you're not going to have the same interest. You're going to have it shift. Yeah. And I think you'll see a movement toward images of coins and images of great coins and maybe information, but virtual product. How that comes out, it's hard to tell because there still is nothing different than holding an actual piece
coin in your hand.
And then, of course, price is outpacing income, so it's going to be very hard for kids to start doing much because it's too costly. The Mint is making entirely too many things for anybody to begin to try to collect just 1 year of all the things they make. They don't have enough money to do that.
$300,000 buy one of everything. Because when you were a kid, it was like $10 or something.
I'm sure that was it. The proof set. But they're also, I'll tell you another thing that's interesting, like an archaeological fact. There's still some great collections that people don't even know are out there. I looked at pictures today at this show. A friend of mine who I promise I won't name because he hasn't bought this. He's trying to buy a collection. It has things in it I've never seen.
Really?
And he's got his
high-grade examples of coin? What exactly is it? Unique
Have
coins?
you ever seen it looks like the old coin holders that were made for change, those Wait Raymond kind of look.
The boards,
You ever seen one
from the 30s and 40s?
You ever seen one for territorial $50 gold pieces? where it goes through and has all the pieces with a description on the back.
So it was Wait Raymond made.
No, I don't Wait Raymond. I'm saying it has that look.
Like
it just
that.
looks
Wow.
like that,
Wow.
but it's for 50s.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
It's for octagonal 50s, and it has all the varieties.
In an old school album. Yeah.
With all the varieties in it,
Wow.
and it's filled.
Letter, read it as you everything. Wow,
It's
that's
filled.
phenomenal.
And it has some extraordinary early California thing.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff.
And it has pieces I've never seen.
That's cool.
Yeah, so there's still collections out there.
I think there is. There's a lot of collections out there that nobody knows about.
There's a collection in New York, in Rochester, New York, that is astonishing.
Mm-hmm.
It was put together by a man who was very wealthy in an engineering firm in 1826. So the collection,
stuff,
with a big budget, he was collecting coins of the United States beginning in 1826.
That's before Mickley. It's before anyone. Sounds like the first coin collection.
So it doesn't stop. What I mean is it just begins.
Sure, yeah.
It begins going. But he was.
And it's still in one place. It still exists.
It's in one place.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Mm-hmm. So my perspective, I think the hobby's alive and well. There's a lot more younger collectors. There's a lot more collectors of coins than what we all think. I recently opened up expanded my store, and I have 3 kids that go to 3 different schools, and I'm always bumping into other parents, and inevitably comes, what do you do for a living? I'm like, I got a little small coin shop in downtown. Half the people, their face lights up, and they tell some story about coins when they were a kid, their grandmother, this or that. I just think there's a lot more collectors, and if you look at a lot of the kids today, we recently held that Wintercoin University where we raised funds, and we had 25 young numismatists.
Right, that's
paid
great.
for them to fly out, and we could easily add 125. But they're really, you got to connect with them, and they're really all on social media now, especially Instagram. So that's one thing we're trying to do to bring in more collectors, to really give them information, because these kids are starving for information.
I was showing some kids the other day, because like I say, the collection I put together isn't just medals. It's artwork related to the inaugurals. It's invitations. It's. But one of the things I was showing them, I said, take a look at this. I'm going to show you something. I said, it's a kind of a little bit damaged and battered poster, and it's painted directly, and it says March 4, inaugural ball, and it has a little. I said, that doesn't really look like much. It's painted by a school kid. I said, and it's for 1933. It's for the Roosevelt inaugural ball, which in every book you read did not happen. I said, but I'll tell you what it is, because I bought it on eBay, because I saw where it down at the bottom it had the school name. In 1933, Mrs. Roosevelt went to a school in the district with black kids they were teaching art to, and got them to hand paint the posters for the 1933 inaugural ball that was held at the Armory. And they'll say that the president did not go. That's correct, but she did. And the ball was held. I have a picture of her at the ball.
That's cool.
Even though...
Are the posters, can you see the posters?
No, the picture's separate. But the poster, you'd never know what it was, except it has March 4, but not a year, and it's got inaugural ball.
Wow.
And then it's at the Armory.
Cool.
But cool. Only if you knew the 2 stories could you put it together and realize what that is. And it's probably the only one left.
Yeah.
Because the artwork, it's a kid.
Sure,
it's
sure.
good, but it's a... but if you know the whole story, it relates Roosevelt, it relates her, it tells you a lot of history and a lot about her, and there's an image that's still preserved to see.
History.
And then you have Manship's Medal, and then you get to hear about Mrs. Kennedy and it being made again in 1961.
It all ties in together.
That's what I mean. It flows.
Yeah.
It flows.
It's fun to figure it out. It's fun to piece it all together, and that's what you're having a good time doing. That's what's fascinating about numismatics, is there's not, in many cases, not clear answers. And half the fun is the hunt and then putting it all together, coming up with a story. Yeah.
And look what's been learned in just the last few years that changed what people thought about a lot of coins.
Yeah. We're finding out new information all the time. It's great. That's what's fun. It's so challenging. I mean, you've been doing this a long time. It's also, we're here at the ANA too in Chicago. And how many ANAs have you been to?
I didn't go to all that many of them, because remember I was down in doing a lot of this. Wasn't very old in Louisiana.
Yeah.
Though I can tell you the first one I went to was in Detroit, Michigan. You'll have to tell me what year they were, like 68 or something.
68, okay. Yeah, what was it like then compared to today? Much smaller?
Well, I was not, I was just looking all around going, this is,
you were in awe,
this is just amazing. Yeah. And I remember David Bowers at a booth, and I remember him handing me an 1807 $half. It was just absolutely spectacular. And I looked at that and I said, how much is that? And he says, whatever he said, $200, I mean $100, whatever it was. I said, but it's not nearly that much in the Red Book. He says, well, the Red Book doesn't tell you where to find one. So
yeah, that's a good answer. I'm going to use that one day. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Oh, and I do remember. Oh, yeah, this is hilarious. Security, well, I guess it was a little different then. My mother and father were with me because they still didn't want me released upon Detroit by myself. So they had come to deliver. And I'm walking in the hallway of the hotel, and there's this cardboard, like a packaging thing, and it's slid on top, and it's leaning against. I don't know why, I just got curious. It's in the hall. I look down in it, and it's a big piece of plastic. And so I lift it up. It's a set of $3 gold pieces.
Really? Wow. Just sitting there.
And sitting there. Wow. And so I brought it and put it in our room. Then I went downstairs, and I went
So you took the $3 set of $3 gold.
Oh, yeah, there's nobody around sitting there.
Okay.
So I went downstairs. I said, look, here's what this thing is. There's got to be a lot of money.
Yeah.
It was in the hall by itself. Nobody's anywhere. Somebody's going to come down here going, oh, my God, where's my set? I said, but I didn't want to leave it there because nobody was there.
Wow, that's a good story. Wow. Also let you know, it's like what you were saying earlier. It's like people built collections, I think, a lot more back then than they did today. I mean, it's great with the Set Registry, but I feel like if people buy individual coins, I mean, you have typesets these days like what you did, but there seems to be a lot more focus on collecting collections, building collections. Why do you think it's changed?
I think that you have a handful of people with enough money to still do a collection, and I think it has a combination of investment in it that wasn't before. I never invested in a coin. And therefore, when I was first buying things, I didn't know how much the prior one had sold for, nor did I care.
Right.
I simply decided, was that right? I was on the front page of a gray sheet, not by name, but they pointed out that some person, and how ridiculous it was, to imagine that somebody would buy a gem uncirculated 1839 no drapery dollar for $1,200.
Yeah.
And that was considered just idiotic.
Right.
Well, it wasn't. It was just beautiful. And I think you have a group of collectors who feel that same way, and that's why price is relevant, but it's not thought of as a barrier, and it's not thought of as it's still going to be what I think it's worth, and they view it. You have a really large investment in sub-collections. In some of them, they really are investment-oriented. And then you have others that are oriented, as I said, toward the best one.
Sure.
And moving that. And then you have, you take a look at Tyrant, that's a collection that's very well thought out and has a theme. That's a fabulous collection, but it's not an assemblage of rare high-grade coins randomly. It's very clear purpose.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal collection, it really is. So what advice would you give to newer collectors or even a little bit seasoned collectors on how to approach it? You've, I'm sure, made a lot of mistakes in your collecting career. What are some of the mistakes and what are some of the pitfalls you would lend? Because thousands of people are going to watch this video and they want to hear what you have to say. You've been collecting coins for so long. What advice would you give them?
Well, it didn't have enough pieces in the collection to do a lot that was right or wrong, because it's only a handful of coins compared to doing a large number. I believe that they should decide what it is they want to collect, look at it individually, and don't think in terms of, is this going to go up or down? Because if you do, I promise you, you're not going to have a good collection, and you're going to make way more mistakes. To Kevin Lipton, he remembers when he was much younger, and I told him something one time. He don't know how it came up. I said, Kevin, I have never regretted buying a coin that someone thought I paid too much for. And I have often regretted buying something because I thought it was a good deal.
Very few good deals. Yeah, that's good advice.
I think that's still true now.
Yeah. You always seem to have to stretch and overpay for the right coin. The trick is to know what the right coin is.
Right. I told someone today, they were talking about their typeset. They were standing there looking at Tyrant. I said, you know what I think's a bargain today? If you want to collect and have a nice collection of type coins, pick about XF. Pick about an extra fine, because they're way too cheap. They're really nice. The design's there. They're pretty. And don't go get something that is graded XF but is ugly. But if you see something and is honest wear, not damage,
original.
I think almost every early U.S. piece that's XF is underpriced.
I agree. I mean, you get the entire design if you could.
And it's a beautiful collection, and you can put together a typeset, and the amount of money involved is not remotely comparable to trying to get a really high-grade specimen.
That's good advice. Alrighty, I think we're going to wrap it up. It was an honor having you here. Mr.
Oh, I
Hayes.
appreciate the invitation.
Really had a good time with you. So thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Slab Lab. Boom, there you go. Thank you very much.